Hey gang, and welcome back. Today we're going to look at how I film, how I edit, and how I produce these games. A lot of people have been reaching out to me, asking me what my process is, what my gear is, stuff like that, so this is probably the best way to inform everyone at once. So to start off, let's look at my gear. First up, I have two GoPro cameras, the GoPro Hero 7 Black and the GoPro Hero 4 Black. The 7 had a price tag of about 400 USD when I bought it, and the 4 sent me back about 350 Canadian when I picked it up. For the cameras, I have a 128GB micro SD card in each of them. At 1080p this gives you about 6 to 7 hours of footage, which is great. They retail about $30 Canadian each. These cameras are in turn attached to a selfie stick that can be mounted to a tripod and then angled parallel to the table. For the tripods, I use Amazon Basics 60-inch lightweight tripod, which costs about 30-ish, and the selfie stick can be anywhere between 20 and 30-ish depending on your length. I then have the camera attached to an Anker candy bar sized power battery, which is about 30-ish as well. I then use the GoPro app for my iPhone and Android, linking one camera to each of my phones. This app will act as your remote and gives you a preview of how the shot's going to look while the camera's hanging over the table. For editing software, I use Adobe Premiere Pro CS 5.5. I use this version because I still had an old license from it, and I don't want to go to a cloud-based system just yet. I'm probably going to be upgrading soon since this can only handle up to 1080p and not 4K, so I'll probably be moving to the Adobe Cloud, which will probably run about $19.99 USD a month, or less if you're a student. For narration, I use a CAD Audio U37 USB Studio Condenser microphone, and that costs about $85 Canadian. I then have a pop filter sitting in front of it, although you might not be able to tell, which should help soften some of my sounds. This is only about $8. Now for how I set up my filming rig, this is what it looks like basically in the shop. What you'll need to be aware of is that no matter how good your selfie stick is, typically the camera, even though it is an action camera, will still cause it to bend slightly. This means you'll have to angle the head of the tripod slightly to get a better, flatter angle. You'll also want to make sure, at least if you want to save yourself some time, that the GoPro or action camera version that you're buying has what's called a linear field of view. A lot of the action cams are basically meant for being outdoor sports cameras, and for that reason, a lot of them have a very wide-angle lens. This results in what's called the fisheye effect, which is what causes the rounded edges in a lot of footage or pictures you might see from GoPros. By using the linear field of view, you're basically telling the GoPro to focus closer on the center and essentially get rid of those fisheye effects. This can save you quite a bit of time in post unless the editing software you have has a way to remove the fisheye effect by itself. Beyond that, using the app is very straightforward and actually allows you to review your old footage so you can see if things get corrupted or basically use it as a playback if something goes wrong. Now let's talk about the editing process. First up, requires filming the game, and this takes however long it takes, plus give or take about an hour for driving. After that, you have to process the footage, at least for the GoPros, and this can take 1 to 2 hours per game. Since I film on two cameras, oftentimes I have my PC and my laptop each handling one game at a time to speed it up. Next up, I have to pick the game that I want to publish, and then I script it. This can take anywhere between half the length of the game, if I'm watching it sped up, to twice the length of the game if it requires me to stop and research cards often. After I finish this, I then do the narration, and this can take about 45 minutes to an hour depending on things like outside noise, how many retakes I have to do, and interruptions. This can actually take longer sometimes because I don't find mistakes until editing the game itself. I then have to go back and redo that part, which can take another minute or two by itself. After I finish narrating, I'll go to the effects section of Audacity. Under this section you'll find what's called noise reduction. What you'll want to do is allow your microphone to record a completely quiet room, and then highlight that section. You'll then click noise reduction and get a noise profile, and then once that's done, you'll click Ctrl-A to select your entire audio file, and then apply the noise reduction to everything. This will help you remove any background sounds that might otherwise distract from your narration. Things like a clock ticking, a car driving by outside, maybe a water drip from your kitchen, who knows. Once the narration's done, I then get to the editing, or the synchronizing as I call it, which is where I take the actual footage and then my narration and synchronize the two together. This can take between 2 to 8 hours per game. Once that's finished, I then add in the art assets, so like the overlay, the card graphics, the life totals, and things like that. That typically takes about an hour. I then need to render and export the footage, which will typically take about 45 minutes to an hour per game, but that doesn't require me to be directly involved in my computer, so typically I use the time to go get groceries. Once that's all finished, I upload to YouTube, which will take about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I have to make a thumbnail and fill in the About section of the title, which will take another about 10 minutes or so. When you start to add up all the time, this is unfortunately the part of the conversation I have with people where I typically lose them. So for the minimum amount of time I'll spend on a game is about 6.5 hours, and typically the maximum is about 16. Sometimes it takes less, sometimes it takes more, but I find that between 7 and 16 hours is usually the norm for a game. I don't have a ton of tips, a lot of the stuff that I do is self-taught, and I'm sure there are better ways to do it, but these are a few of the things that I try and keep in mind every time I do a game. First, when I'm scripting, I try and make a mental note of key moments in the game that might look best on camera. I'll then try and synchronize the audio and the video so that it makes for a more engaging experience for the viewer. During the art asset phase, I'll usually just put the images in at first. Once they're all in the file, I'll then go back to an older game and copy the settings that I've already applied to those images, and then swap back to the current one and apply it there. This works well for the card overlays during the actual game, and I can often just highlight them all and simply just apply the setting once. As a way to stop myself from going crazy, I'll typically keep track of the life total and turns while doing my initial narration and gameplay synchronization. This gives me a bit of a break from doing just the cutting and pasting, and while it isn't necessarily the fastest way of doing it, it at least makes it more enjoyable for me. Last but not least, I have to highly recommend that you shortcut key cut and ripple delete if you're using Adobe Premiere Pro. As I used to do the games, I'd make a cut and then drag the video file all the way back to that original cut. By using ripple delete, what you'll want to do is use a cut for your initial part, and then cut where you want to have the film take place. It'll remove the unwanted footage, and move the part where your final cut was to where your first cut was. Anyway, I hope this helps give you guys an idea of how much work and time I put into it, plus how I do it. And if you have any questions or are looking for any help, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm always willing to talk shop, and also if you have suggestions for how to make my process even faster, please lay them on me. I am totally open to learning new tips and tricks. For audio software, I use the free program Audacity to record my voice.